Our next speaker, Dale Atkins. Dale was president of the AAA for 3 years. Is that right?
No, about 2.
About 2. Probably felt like 3. And, but ski patrol, 20 years. 20 years working avalanche forecasting, Colorado Avalanche Information Center, and over 40 years in the rescue world, doing mountain rescue. And currently he's working for RECO. And yeah, we're just really excited to have him here because he brings a lot of diverse experience with the patrolling, rescue, and also forecasting. So anyway, Dale, thank you so much for coming up from Colorado, and really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Ed. Do that again, would you? No, that's okay. It's an honor for me to be up here, and I'm the youngest one, and I'll try to not have my voice crack while I'm up here, since I'm probably the younger one. But I thought I'd just start with a few pictures, because everyone's got a few pictures, and I'll just start with a few. I mean, my first avalanche rescue was back before they had colored photography and colored film. But I want to point out, that's a St. Bernard. There's no keg around its neck. But there was a St. Bernard rescue group in Colorado. I was in junior high school at the time on a rescue team. And they had 3 St. Bernards that came out. 2 of the dogs hit the scent, just like the scent cone. The head snaps back and went right to this fellow who had been buried for over a week under 2 feet of snow. It was really impressive. Of course, the 3rd St. Bernard just kind of ran around slobbering with it. But that was my exposure, and this is the slope. It was just a very tiny slope, not even 200 feet tall, that caught this skier. So also in junior high, we would have our parents occasionally take us up to a place called St. Mary's Glacier. Okay, we called it a glacier. It's barely a snowbank. But for Colorado, it's a glacier. And as some of you may remember, the old Nordic skis, the old wooden ones with the pine tar on the bottom and lots of axe and alpha boots that were more like bedroom slippers than ski boots. But we'd go skiing with those. But they weren't really fun to go skiing on. So we would haul a runner's sled in, the flexible or flyer type runner's sled. And we would hike up the glacier. And then you could pull off about 600 vertical feet on a really steep slope that we learned later was an avalanche slope. And then down across the lake, about a quarter mile across the lake. And we would fly on this thing. So we're up there one day doing it. The wind's blowing. St. Mary's Glacier, pretty nasty place. It's lunch. So we kind of tuck behind some crumholts. We're sitting there eating lunch. Then we come back out. And where we had been sledding in the morning, there was this big avalanche pile of debris right at the bottom. It had released while 4 of us kids, ages 12, 13, and 14, had been sledding on it for hours that morning. We just thought that was pretty cool. We didn't think any difference, but that's how close we were to an accident, getting killed. And it took quite a few years to realize that. But that's, I think, a theme for a lot of people, the vulnerability. Is everything's going well, and then in a split second, it all changes. So that's 2 stories. Another one that really shaped my perception and interest in avalanches was Highlands Bowl, March 31st, 1984. 3 ski patrollers, Kessler, Snyder, and, I should remember their names. I've forgotten the third, were killed in this avalanche while doing control work when it released above them. And Rod mentioned this. And this one hit me hard because 3 months earlier, I had spent 3 days on a patrol exchange with those guys and skiing this. And here were 3 guys that I really looked up to, had a tremendous amount of experience, and they got themselves in trouble. Why did that happen? A few years later, February 1987, Peak 7 outside Breckenridge. 7 skiers were caught, 4 buried and killed, 2 were buried, 1 with a hand out, 1 with his head out. Those 2 survived, but 4 people killed. We spent 4 days searching. This is day 2. We had over 400 people out searching. On day 2, we had over 300 the next day. I ended up, and I was just really a young pup in this game. My voice had changed, fortunately, but I ended up as the site commander on this. And not because of any special avalanche rescue skill, but because as a patroller at Loveland, and having done exchanges, I knew people on all the other patrols. As a mountain rescuer, I knew people on all the other patrols, and I was a mission leader sort of thing. So I got drafted into being the site commander. And I think it was maybe one of those things, anybody who's not interested, please step back, and I wasn't paying attention, and there I was with it. But here was an effort that went for basically 4 days with hundreds of people searching. And these guys were really hard to find. And it took 4 days. They weren't searchable. So that really shaped my perspective on rescues. And also, with each of the 4 people that were buried and killed when we dug them up, we brought them down to a staging area. And we put them in kind of a little pup tent sort of thing. And then something that we had never done before, at least in the mountain rescue world, we actually allowed their friends and families to come in and spend some time with their loved ones, with the body, with it. And I was there bringing the people in and kind of bringing them out. And, tremendously emotional. But it made that full circle connection as being a forecaster, a ski patroller, doing the control work, being a rescuer, to now seeing the impact of an accident on the family, the friends, and loved ones. Because when we talk about accidents, we often talk, there's 2 types. There's accidents that happen to us, but they're not going to really happen to us because we're smart, we're careful, and we're doing all the right things. And then there's accidents that happen to them. That's everybody else that's out there. And we always just kind of treat them as them and not as the people and the stories that are part of it. And all those people that get hurt and killed in avalanches, and how many of us, you read an accident report and you think, what in the world were they thinking? How many of us have done that? I can't be the only one raising both hands. Yeah, all of those people are just like us. They're no different than us. So my tale is, as Don talked about earlier this morning, the importance of the search and rescue experience, especially when he was with the Park Service, and dealing in the search and rescue world, and seeing, I think, as he said, it was the consequences of people's ambitions, or exceeding their ambitions exceeding their abilities, that sort of thing. Really important. Sir, those happened a long time ago, but I'm still amazed by avalanches. I'm still amazed by people. Sheep Creek, 2 years ago, 6 people completely buried and 5 killed with that. And I was there within about a half hour after the first rescuers arrived. And those of you that have done rescues know it's a very lonely place when you show up there. So what would I tell myself as a rookie? So here's the short version. If you forget everything else that I'm going to talk about, which is really important, I think it is. But here's the short version with it. Don't ask yourself, can we do this? Now, how often have you been, you're looking at opening terrain, you're looking at opening a road, or whether we close the road, and you ask the question, well, can we do this? Usually, we look at our staff or our colleagues, the people that are with us, and, well, what's our weather, our terrain, what's been our control program, what mitigation efforts have we done, where are we with this? Can we do this? And as Liam mentioned earlier this morning, the internal pressures. We like to say, yes, we're a can-do group of people. But don't frame the question this way. Can we do it? Ask, what conditions do I require to do it safely? What conditions do I need to do this job safely? Basically, what are your operating requirements? So that you're dictating the terms that you need to do the job with it, instead of the terms dictating how you're going to do the job. And that's maybe been the biggest lesson that I've learned, and that lesson comes from a room full of people here. But I've got to add the long version as well. First one I thought is, I think we all know that avalanche work is not going to make us rich. But saving Smart saving may make you rich. Smart decisions will keep you alive with it. Experts. Yeah, avalanche experts are alive. Ron Perla years ago had his rules of thumb. I think he had 5 or 6 of them.
10.
Oh, it was 10? Was it that many? Okay, well, that was more than I could remember. But some of the key ones, like the first rule, is that there are no rules of thumb. Another rule of thumb was only fools and rescuers travel when the avalanche danger is high, or something along those lines. And then the other one is that all the avalanche experts are dead. When you talk to Ron, it was said, a little bit in jest, and I think if you keep the context of where that is, if you think you know it all, you're going to get yourself killed in this game. Oh. Rod comes through. Wait a minute. Hold on. We just have to have an intermission here. If you want to stand up, stretch your legs for just 30 seconds. I've got to take a picture of this list so that we have it. Or at least okay, thanks. I'll get a picture of you guys too. There we go. First rule of thumb, consider the general rule, never tour after a storm. The question is, how soon after the storm are conditions safe? 1 hour, 1 day, 1 month, or a whole season? Number 2, what conditions are unstable? Okay, I made the variation of it. When conditions are unstable, the wise only travel for the rescue of fools. Number 3, when it comes to judging slope stability, the rule of thumb is there are no rules of thumb. 4, a ski tour disaster is triggered by someone's intuition, there's that word, that a slope is stable. Yeah, we wouldn't go out on it if we knew it was unstable and going to slide. 5, next time you come to an avalanche slope, ask not only will it slide, but also what will happen if it does slide. Will it slide, and what will happen? What's going to happen to me? As Rod talked about, am I standing in the right place on this? And I'm going to come back to this theme in a few minutes here. I like number 6. When crossing an avalanche slope, he who hesitates is lost. How many have done ski cutting where you're out there walking across or jumping up and down in one spot instead of zipping across? We've all done that, but he who hesitates is lost. Number 7, the family that tours together gets buried together. Yeah. Ron called him as he saw him, and he still does. Number 8, the weekend ski tour begins with a Friday night call to the snow ranger or the ski patrolman. Yeah, and I think now we've expanded that your first forecast, whether you're a recreationalist or professional, starts with the first snow of the season. Unless you're like Liam and you're worried about next season's snow already. 9, carry a probe. Carry a probe as you would have others carry a probe for you. I think we could modernize that one. Be able to use your transceiver as you wish others could use their transceiver to find you. 10, I didn't say it very well, but I think you got the idea. 10, a fact for what it's worth. No one wearing an avalanche cord has been recovered dead. Well, that's no longer true. With an avalanche cords, the red cords, the white ones never worked really well. The red ones, they worked pretty well.
You can have that.
May I?
Yes.
This is a privilege. And we will get that list to later. We need to get that to you. But the avalanche cord. The idea goes back, in Colorado, the miners talked about avalanche ribbons in the 1880s. The avalanche cord goes back to Europe even long before. But as some of you know, it was that red parachute cord. If you had a little money, you bought the one with the little metal clips every 3 meters or 5 meters apart. And if you tied it properly, you had it so the arrows were pointed toward you instead of away from you. But the avalanche cord, it was really an effective piece psychologically. What they found, the Swiss did a bunch of studies. They tumbled dummies down avalanche slopes with avalanches and found that the cord actually spooled around the person about half of the time. It really didn't get to the surface. But if you used an avalanche cord, it made you think avalanche. And a friend of mine said that anytime you had to deploy your avalanche cord, you already had made a mistake. Because we really tried to stay out of the way and avoid. And I think those of us that used avalanche cords, they were usually wadded up. Mine was wadded up in my jacket pocket. So just the whole ordeal to try and untangle it and spread it out behind you and then have it around, it was so much hassle to use, we just generally went another way. We also weren't very good skiers too, so that helped as well. But avalanche experts, yeah, we are alive. And I don't know how many mountain managers and ski area people I have had said to me over the years, especially when we were trying to raise money at the Avalanche Center, is, well, you know, Dale, all the avalanche experts are dead. Well, that kind of hurts, I think, for us that have made this our profession. And as you're hearing today, it's not about what we know, it's about learning what we don't know. Perceptions. Experts don't agree. And I'd say that perceptions are even more important than knowledge. I've got an asterisk there because it's not just the knowledge, but it's how you use that knowledge and what you're going to do with it. And a great example of this came out just not even a month ago, a few weeks ago. There was a big study that came out about breast cancer, middle of March. And so this is the day the study came out. Look at the headline: accuracy high for pathologists interpreting breast biopsies. Okay, so that's the Doctor's Lounge, which is this kind of informal doctor's blog site. But then look at some of these other ones. Breast biopsies leave room for doubt. Breast cancer studies frequently misinterpreted. So here we have doctors, physicians, the pathologists, people that do this. They look at thousands of these a year. They can't seem to agree. The next day, well, some more people started looking at the study, and it really wasn't that favorable. Study questions accuracy, not 100% reliable. Doubts raised, diagnosis errors. And what they found in this study is that for the usual stuff, ductal carcinoma in situs, invasive cancers, the doctors did really well at picking those up. They were accurate with those. Where they were not accurate were with the atypia, the atypical cancers. When it comes to the avalanche world, it's pretty clear what to do and when the conditions are dangerous, or when the danger is low or when the danger is high or extreme. It's that middle ground that we all struggle with. There's that uncertainty. I think Don mentioned that Rod being one of the most curious people. And I think I have to agree with that. And looking at avalanches, and my word for it was it's about discovery. And it doesn't start with the knowledge. Yeah, we get the knowledge, but that discovery is all about the curiosity of and asking the questions. And that's something I've got to say thank you to Rod and Don, Liam, and everybody else here. But think of it as discovery. Always, why did this happen? How did this happen? Why didn't this happen? Why could it happen? And that's going to keep you looking. And it's going to keep your interest in avalanches fresh. Future value. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing here. But our perception of the future, our value of the future, really is what shapes our decisions today. If you want to stay alive in this industry and in this game and in this sport, you really need to have a high value on the future. And it's actually well documented in a whole bunch of different domains, but that having a high value of the future leads to less unsafe behaviors. There's a reason why those. How many of you have been in the military, served in the military? Thank you very, very much for your service. There's a reason the military likes young soldiers. Because when we're young, we don't have a value of the future, or much of a value of the future. But when you start thinking of the future, that's going to help you make, I think, a little smarter decisions. Have you ever asked people in your avalanche class, what's the most important goal on your ski day when you're going out recreating? And most people say, I shred the gnar, dude. Or something, maybe not quite like that. But it's about, having fun and, skiing the steep and the deep, that sort of thing. No, the most important thing is to come back home so you can do it tomorrow. What's the worst thing that can happen to you in an avalanche? What's the worst thing? You don't survive it. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, when I ask that question, usually in a group of non-professionals and recreational people, there's always a chuckle or two when people say, oh, you can die with it. And there's always that chuckle. And that tells me they don't take it seriously, that they don't recognize that as a real potential in what they're doing. So something that I learned, and it was actually from a driving class, a safe driving class, and I won't say why I had to take it. Darn radar guns. But think of the two most important people in your life right now. Whether it's your spouse, or your husband, your boyfriend, girlfriend, work colleagues. Think of those two most important people in your life right now. Can you see them in your mind? Picture? Okay, so we go out, whether we're skiing or we're at work, we're running a route, we're skiing a big line, or we're just kind of shuffling around in some tricky, complex terrain. You get buried and killed, severely hurt. What is your loss going to do to their lives? How do their lives change with your loss? So it's not about us. It's about everybody else that we might leave behind with it. But that's a way to change perspective on why we want to keep coming back and doing what we do. Justifiable risk. Acceptable risk does not equal justifiable risk. We use acceptable risk all the time. Okay, well, we've got to open this terrain. We think we've done everything that we need to do. I think it's acceptable to open it. Yeah, I'd put my mom out there. I think it's good enough. We're in the backcountry. Yeah, I've got my transceivers, shovels, and probes. I'm with good people. Yeah, okay, I think that's acceptable. Getting killed in an avalanche is not acceptable. Acceptable risk does not exist with avalanches. But we can justify our decisions. We should be able to justify and defend our decisions. And I learned this from meeting with people, with the friends. Yeah, we thought it was acceptable. We thought it would be fine. Because most of the time it is. But it plays out in other ways. I remember Steve Fawcett, the aviator, billionaire guy, flew a balloon around the world and then disappeared while flying a small plane over southern Nevada, California, something like that. This guy had thousands and thousands of hours of flying. Takes off in his little plane from his ranch, cruising along at 14.5, nice and level, and then his transponder gets turned off. He's above mountaintops. Why do pilots typically turn off transponders? Because they want to go to places they shouldn't officially be. Turned off his transponder and crashed, and about a year or so later, they found him. The NTSB reported that he ran into a downdraft that he couldn't climb out of and was forced into the ground. Is that really what happened? No, he flew into the ground. He was flying too close to the ground because he was taking what he thought was an acceptable risk to duck down and look. It was known that he would like to check out hunting areas and look at terrain, look at properties, and he would frequently drop down below ridges and check things out. It was acceptable to him, but he couldn't justify it. So that's kind of my distinction here, as we look at risk. We want to be able to justify what we do. So when something does go wrong, and it will go wrong, I don't remember if it was Liam or Don who said it, but at the end of the day, we want to be able to hopefully sleep at night, but at least get up the next morning and be able to go back to work and do a good job. Dumb decisions. As I said earlier, how many of us have read accident reports or case reports and gone, what in the world were they thinking? That was pretty stupid. I think we've all been there. The problem is those people are doing things we've all done too with it. And well, take a look at this. Does that look like a dumb decision? Okay, I'll come around and look at it from over here. I'd say that looks like a dumb decision. But notice my frame of reference. I'm not here looking at it. What do you think those guys are thinking? Hey, we're pretty clever. We got some ingenuity. I mean, a little, redneck humor. What's the last words most rednecks say before an accident? Yeah, hold my beer. I got an idea with it. So what might appear dumb to us is not to the people that get into trouble. In fact, people don't make dumb decisions. They make decisions that they think are going to protect them with whatever they're doing. A few years ago, outside of Truckee, back in the days when it did snow, sorry, California guys, some of you may have seen the video that it was a group of skiers, and they're skiing down the ridge. The last guy that goes down gets buried in the avalanche. They only have one transceiver in the group of, they have two transceivers in the group of like 5. They have one shovel or so. The one guy runs out to start digging. Fortunately, he sees a hand or a ski or something sticking out. He runs over, he pulls out the shovel and doesn't even use the handle, just starts trying to dig with the blade and then loses his gloves. And I mean, this is a junk show all the way around. The good news is the guy survived. And this guy, I've got to hand it to him. It was all videotaped with a GoPro, and it was put online. And he was just beaten down by all the pundits of the backcountry ski world. This guy is, his late 30s. He skis almost 100 days a year. He's never been to a formal avalanche training, but he goes to occasional evening programs. He's read some of the books. He watches he's seen some of the shows on television. He's trying to do the right things. He's with a group of friends. It was his son that actually dug him out. They're trying to do the right things. They had a whole plan for this. It just went sideways. But for us on the outside, it looked totally dumb. But for him and his group, it was very deliberate and very rational to what they were doing. And we need to think about what were they thinking. And yeah, people make rational decisions. Just some are better than others. Brain. Yeah, weapon or shield. Yeah, the brain. Usually I just leave mine on my nightstand so it doesn't get me in too much trouble with it. But a lot of us have said over the years that the brain is the best tool we have for being safe. I'd also argue it's the most dangerous tool we have for leading us into doing things and getting us into trouble. Back to my earlier point, an observation of looking at accidents. People think they've got it thought out. They think they have it figured out, and that's what gets us in trouble. Our usual way we start looking at accidents, we come away from it and we just say, okay, you just need to be smarter, you've got to try harder. That's not going to reduce accidents. There's a lot of really skilled people that get into trouble. Maybe they make a mistake, they make an error, or it could be just bad luck. So the brain is important, but it's just how are we going to use it? Back to that justifiable, acceptable risk. I was in Canada a few years ago skiing with a group, and I told these guys, well, if you go over there, you're going to probably trigger an avalanche. This is a narrow little gully. It was fresh snow. It was pretty clear. There was instability. What do these guys do? They go right over and jump in the gully, trigger an avalanche. But he's got his airbag, pulls the airbag, and it stays on top. It wasn't a big avalanche by any means. Yes, he did soil his shorts. We joke about it, but people do that. You start talking to people and they will pee their pants with it in an avalanche. Okay, so a bad day. The avalanche doesn't even fall 100 vertical feet. Fracture line, the crown face is only about a foot deep. Debris is really not over even your knees. So not really a big deal. They thought it was acceptable. It wouldn't be a big deal. Here's the problem. He lost both skis. He's also 4 hours away from the hut at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. All of a sudden, what seemed like an acceptable risk became a really big and serious problem. Because to send somebody back to the hut and hurry back out probably would have been 6 hours to get skis for him to go out. So what was acceptable was not justifiable. But it was acceptable then because they thought it all out. What's going to happen to me if I'm in this avalanche? Nothing. It's not going to be that big a deal, except they lost their skis. 2 hours later, we did find skis, and it wasn't, everyone got out. So a recommendation, if we want to prevent accidents, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people. I've been really fortunate in this world. I've got to be the forecaster. I've got to be the patroller and work on the highway side and do that. But when it comes to accidents, I've also gotten to talk to all of you and everybody at the avalanche centers and collect the information, get the reports, and then go talk to families and loved ones and those sort of things. But if we want to prevent accidents, it's not about being smarter and trying harder, but it's we need to figure out why it made sense for that person to do what they did. Why did it make sense for Bob to go ski this, for Jill to jump into this? Because if we know why it made sense to them, we know where the vulnerabilities are. And we need to seek out our own vulnerabilities. What makes us vulnerable to getting into avalanches? I like steep and deep. Okay, I don't work in the snow on a daily basis. I look at it from a window. I look at it from a computer. I live it vicariously through all of you. But boy, if I still think I'm really on top of this, I'm going to get in big trouble. So we've got to recognize our vulnerabilities. We need to understand why it made sense for people to get into trouble. So if you're on a rescue, talk to the people. Not, what in the world were you thinking? But tell me your story. How did you end up in this place today? How did this happen? You're going to learn a lot from those stories. Uncertainty. We've heard this term battered around a few times, and I think it's really cool that it's being used more and more now. If we go back 30 years ago, it was all about uncertainty. Look at the stuff that Ed LaChapelle wrote about in Perla and dealing with uncertainty. Uncertainty kind of disappeared over the last generation of avalanche professionals. But uncertainty, a number of different definitions. You could say it's unpredictable. I like to say it's the estimate of the estimate. The estimate of the estimate. This goes back to Frank Knight, who's an economist in the early teens and 1920s. And he wrote extensively about uncertainty from an economic perspective, but it applies to us. The estimate the probability of the occurrence, estimate the possible outcomes. This is what Frank Knight wrote about economic concerns. Does that sound like avalanches? In fact, Perla has it right here on one of his. Rule of thumb number 5. Next time you go out on an avalanche slope, ask not only will it slide, but also what will happen if it does slide. We're dealing with 2 estimates, 2 guesses when we're dealing with uncertainty. Recommendation for it. When you're faced with uncertainty, you don't want to rely on decisions that require predictions. You're just compounding your uncertainty. with it. So what do we do with that? We become systematic. And that was the things that Liam talked about, and Don and Rod and everybody this morning, and how we're assessing this stuff. Yeah, and at some point we do have to say, okay, well, let's open it up. We can't throw explosives at it like some plaintiffs' attorneys will say we should. So we have to go for it. But if we make it a justifiable risk, then we're going to be in much better condition or better shape. But about the uncertainty and luck and some other things, I threw out this little survey. And thank you very much for taking part in it. And so with the recreationalist, and I've only got a sample of 6, so it's not big. Average number of years, almost 22 years. So those of you, what percentage of the following makes up an avalanche prognostication, that forecast, whether it's on paper, the danger rating, or at the top of the slope? So on the recreational side, almost half felt, or I should say that science made up half of that decision, half of that input, half of that information. With intuition and experience, about 40%, and luck, 14%. So for the recreational side, for just the few that are here, put a lot into the science. If we look at the professionals, those of you working in this industry, a little bit different. The science shrinks down to 38%, and the intuition and experience goes to 48%. Luck still stays the same, about 14% with it. So what is intuition? Okay, you can say it's experience. But intuition is knowing, is perceiving a fact independent of knowledge, science, information. It's feel. For back to the cosmic side of things. But it comes with miles and miles and hours and years spent in the mountains. So what do we draw from this? Okay, there's a little bit of a difference between how we on the professional side look at things, maybe on the recreational side. And I wanted to break it down a little bit more to see, do forecasters look at it differently than, say, guides or mechanized guides from other guides? And I don't know, but this was just a question. It's back to that discovery of how do we use this information, that where do we go to get the information? But there is a difference here, it seems. The other thing I want to point out is that those of you that did the survey yesterday, which is about 20 of you, actually had luck down at 10% or less. And I think that the discussion this morning with hearing uncertainty being bantered around and luck being bantered around has pushed that up with it. I think that's really important. Okay, yeah, luck, yeah, it's just a success by chance, but it's much more prevalent in what we do than we realize. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And the best example of that, I think some of you knew Robeson Gosmer up in Canada, who was killed a few weeks ago. You know, a tremendously talented ski guide and savvy avalanche person. Others of you, with Craig's death in Utah a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago. A number of us have lost friends, really talented, savvy, knowledgeable people. And they weren't doing dumb things. They weren't doing silly things. They got themselves in trouble. People, there's accidents where 2 people can go down a mountainside. They'll go 600 vertical feet down. They were standing literally side by side when the avalanche started. At the bottom, one person is buried a meter down. The other person is buried to their ankles and stands up and walks away. Luck with that. A month ago, there was a fellow who fell off the backside of Targhee, went 250 feet through the air before he got to bounce a few times, partly buried. He literally walked away from that avalanche after getting rescued. Robson is out during a time which everybody in Canada said it was the most stable conditions of the winter. It was the time to go ski everything and go do things. And he triggers a monster avalanche. And he's a pretty cautious guy. Luck is a big part of what we do. So when we go out, Well, we saw in Liam's picture of the Middle Cirque, 150 people or so had skied it. Those stories happen every few years, where hundreds of people have skied or run Mammoth, Peak 7, some in Europe in the last few years, and then the avalanche gets triggered with it. Okay, is that just spatial variability? Yeah, we can say that. We can rationalize why that happens. But there's a lot of luck involved. There was an accident at Aspen Highlands in the late 80s. Over 600 people skied the terrain, and it released on the last 2 skiers that afternoon in the steeplechase area. I mean, it's practically bumps had already formed when that happened. So here's the challenge for us. When we go out, whether we're in the backcountry, we're looking at managing terrain within our ski areas, we're working on the roads, and we go out and nothing happens. There's no avalanche. Maybe we throw some ski cuts in, or we use some explosives, or even we decide, nope, the snow is stable. It's good. It's not going anywhere. How well do we really know that? How well? And that's our problem with avalanches, is that we don't get that feedback, and if we do, often it's with a bad outcome. So we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. And the way we sometimes deal with uncertainty is with luck. Luck's not a bad thing. And I believe in luck. We just don't want to put our faith in luck and have to trust in luck. So, just to kind of wrap this up, to work smarter, remember what the short version was? It's back, what do I need to do this job safely? Or what are my operating requirements? And I think that's what I have learned with over 30 years of working in avalanches. Is to try not to let the conditions dictate you, but try to set your own conditions and limits and then work within them. And that's going to keep you back behind the edge. So thanks. Don?
Dale, you mentioned avalanche boards. It made me wonder where I left mine. But I have the one that has the arrow pointing in the right direction. But I'm wondering if you could comment on the role of the equipment sophistication that's been developed for avalanche, starting with beacons, avalon, airbags, maybe even GoPros.
Yeah, sure.
How that's really impacted the trends of avalanche-related incidents.
Yeah, I think transceivers have had the biggest impact, both good and bad, with it. Transceivers, those of us that learned in the analog days, and just to go back, it wasn't all that long ago, when I started ski patrolling in the very early 80s, the transceivers were locked up in the cabinet. You didn't take them out every day. You got to be on the special, you got to be one of the special guys that got to take the transceiver out. So I mean, there was that attitude 30 plus years ago to now a transceiver is a standard piece of PPE that you put on, when you get dressed in the morning, you turn it on, and you turn it off when you get back to the locker room. You turn it off when you get back to your car. That sort of thing. But we've also created this idea that the transceiver, along with the shovel and probe, is the ticket to the backcountry. You've got to have this stuff to go into the backcountry. We haven't done a very good job of explaining all the stuff that comes along with it. So my long-winded answer with that is the transceivers have gotten easier to use. Since the transceivers got easier to use in the late 1990s up to 2000s, we actually saw the mortality rate of avalanche burials with people with transceivers go down. In the last 15 years, it's gone right back up, and it's gone above and higher than it was before the digital transceivers came out. Today, more people die buried in avalanches with transceivers than survive with them. So I think a lot of people see this gear and airbags and avalungs and Recco and helmets and all of these things as Superman's cape. You know, it's the shield, Captain America's shield. And if that's a perspective that people hold, you're going to get into trouble with it. So the technology, it's improved tremendously. They can save lives, but I think they've also caused people to push their limits and go out into terrain. Maybe another way to say that. Back in the day, I don't mean, to go back to old stories, but we learned, we took avalanche information and knowledge and skills to avoid avalanches and stay out of the way. Don talked about spring skiing and being risk adverse instead of trying to manage or mitigate the risk. So we use that equipment if we messed up. And today people are using that equipment to push the limits and boundaries. We used to say avalanche accidents are preventable. Why? Because we trigger them. And if we can stop triggering avalanches, we'll stop and avoid avalanche slopes when the snow's unstable, we can avoid having accidents. But today, people are purposely going out into high consequence terrain, which is fun, but they're also doing it during periods of significant instability. Accidents at that point are no longer preventable, they're inevitable. Maybe another comment before the hook comes? Ron?
I'm not sure that the distinction between intuition and science is very clear cut. Because to develop intuition and what you actually you put into your consideration in your subconscious rely a lot on what you learn, a lot of science you basically read and accumulate. To say it's only intuition, basically say maybe I shouldn't take avalanche course at all. I'm just gonna hang up in the backcountry, and if I'm gonna survive so many years, I'm going to develop this intuition. So I think one feeds the other. It's not very clear cut as far as.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's actually quite blurry, probably in reality. So I mean, what is scientific decision making? And maybe Ladine or Ed, if he'll straighten me out on this, but I'll throw this out, and then please let me know. But scientific decision making is being systematic and having a process of hypothesizing what you think is going on, collecting data, and assessing it, and then making your decision. But you're doing it through a system with it. We collect a lot of data, but does it really help us make better decisions? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So there is this blending with it, but it takes time. I think that one of the big challenges is with avalanches is there's often no do-overs if you really mess up as a backcountry person. And I want to go back to, I don't remember if it was Liam or Rod that said it, but go out and trigger avalanches. Just don't become a statistic with it, but you'll learn more in triggering an avalanche in that 30 seconds or the few minutes leading up to it than you'll often pick up in a course. With it, and that comes back to that absorbing that energy. So it's important, get out there and get your hands in the snow, and get that feel for it. But you've got to combine the two. There is no clear delineation. That's a good point, Mark. Yeah.
Dale, first thing that kind of comes to your mind, is there an accident you've been to that just sort of pops out? Something that just makes it really memorable for you, more than some others? I'm sure you have plenty.
There's a lot. The Sheep Creek one. 6 people buried. One fellow, he's buried, he gets his hand out pretty quickly, he's got plenty of air, it's not a problem. He knows all he has to do is get to his phone. And he could have rescuers there in 15 minutes, and he spends the next 3.5 hours clawing away at snow to try and get to his phone. And he never is able to. It's also interesting in a group setting, organized group, that no one missed that group, even though they were only supposed to be gone for an hour with it. And I think, to me, the lesson is it's really easy to get distracted I'm sorry, so this is Sheep Creek, and I'm sorry, in Colorado, because so many of us know of it. Sheep Creek happened a couple of years ago in Colorado. It was an organized group of ski split boarders. It was a festival. In fact, it was a fundraiser for the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. The night before, Scott Tepford, one of the forecasters, gave a great presentation about the deep slab instability problems and the persistent slabs and on what slopes were dangerous, and told these guys exactly, where the problem is in the snow and on what slopes. And what's neat on this accident is one of the very few that we have a complete record of everything before the accident and leading up to the accident. These guys had all the information. They had a guide with them. Most of them had avalanche training. Some of them had quite a bit. They spread out 50 feet apart, which is not spreading out on a steep slope, but there were 6 of them. This tells me that they really didn't think there was a problem where they were. They were kind of going through the motions with it. This is in April. They get a big woof, usually what we see in December, January. And they brought down a slope about 800 vertical feet above them that came down, completely buried them into a terrain trap. So a very experienced group, had all the right equipment. They knew the danger. They had been briefed. They even did a transceiver practice search right before they went out on it. And they still got themselves in trouble.
Was that side country? Correct, side country.
Technically, you might call it that, because it was just outside the ski area, but it was that part of the ski area was closed for the season. So it was backcountry with that. But that was just, they seem to have had all the information, but they still got themselves into trouble. That was a big thing for me about luck, because they were on a route that I've probably done at least 50 to 60 times over the last 30 years. Because I worked there, and we would do that all the time, and we were supposed to be sitting duty on the lift. But, and to see that accident and happen, it was like, well, how often was I lucky doing that? So there was that accident. There was an accident. People survive underneath the snow. People that have lost their fingernails, taking the skin down off their fingers to their bones exposed, clawing to try and get out. People do live for long times under the snow. We just don't know that. There's accidents with young children. There's accidents with older people. And probably the biggest thing is there's accidents. If you ever are looking at an avalanche accident and you can't relate to something in that accident, you've probably put your own blinders on. Because there are people doing things that we like to do with it. I mean, there's been sea kayaker killed in an avalanche, a natural release came down. Been a mountain biker caught in an avalanche. So yeah, sorry, right? It's a long-winded, but there's a lot of different stories. Yes, I will work on snowy torrents on that. Maybe another question before the hook? Yeah, right?
Have you been caught in an avalanche?
I've embarrassed myself a couple of times.
So what have you, given that you're the kind of rescue guy and the stats guy, and like, what did you take away from that personally?
Well, knock on wood so far. But I caught a few times unexpectedly, not while doing ski cuts, patrolling, that sort of thing. But one, and this was a big eye opener for me, we were trying to ski cut hard slabs. Is that very smart? No, but 30 years ago, it seemed pretty reasonable with it. We were out ski cutting, and you could hear the hollow drum-like sounds, and I'm out on there, and I'm not trying to hesitate. I'm trying to pop this thing out. I'm bouncing and jumping up and down because it sounds just like a drum. And it finally goes. It goes out much bigger than it had expected. And I'm really lucky. I'm able to scoot out to the side, and everyone's like, oh, that was pretty cool. That was close. And so, okay, we got that slide done. At the end of the day, I get back to the locker room after work, and I go to take my transceiver off, and it's turned off. They didn't turn it on. That was a pretty big eye-opening experience to me right there. Yeah. So, but I'm trying really, I hope this does not show up on my tombstone, that I'm an accident waiting for a place to happen, but I'm an accident trying not to happen with it. I think that's a good way to go. or to try and live things.
But like you said, that's everybody, right?
It's everybody, yeah. It's everybody. But we don't think we're gonna get in trouble. As soon as we start thinking we're not gonna get in trouble, that's when the wheels fall off the cart.
I thought you had a good comment about the equipment being used today about, like pushing the boundaries of the equipment. I guess one of the counters to that is be at the top of the slope and you're gonna go ski it and turn your beacon off and see if you can ski it.
Yeah, that's been around for quite a while. I learned that from Don Sheriff. And you get to the top, make everybody turn their transceivers off. And ask, now who wants to ski this?
Yeah.
And nobody does. They're all like, I'm not gonna ski it. And as I said earlier, more people die with transceivers that get buried in an avalanche than survive. So we don't want, and Tom Kimbrough years ago, I think he was the one who said, would you go into a bar if you knew there was a 1 in 3 chance of getting in a fight? And, well, some of you might, but vulnerability is really an important concept to us that we don't really talk about. We're quite vulnerable, whether we're individuals or if we're dealing with, with structures and roads and those sort of things. We've got to weigh that into the equation, our vulnerability. Any others? Maybe time for the hook to come out? Lynn?
Well, I've just been introduced to the concept of margin from the wildland firefighting. And I wonder if you've read any stuff on margin. A little bit in this editorial, but you've got any sources or any insight into that? What you talk about is you're kind of dancing around the concept of margin.
Yeah, and I'm going to draw an old age moment, because I don't remember exactly what that is. But in terms of the wildlands fires, how many of you are wildlands fire people or Forest Service or have gotten your red cards and that sort of thing? Yeah, there's a lot of lessons we can learn from that side of that we can use the wildlands world as a metaphor for what we're doing.
And maybe if anybody else out there has some resources to send me towards, I'd love to grab some of that from you.
With that, Doug, is it time to get the hook out? And
Yeah, thank you, Dale.
thank you.